The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was built to make visitors feel small, and for most species, it worked. The ceiling stretched so high that the lights looked like tiny stars. The walls shifted with slow patterns of color that showed the mood of the council. On this day, the colors were cold and sharp, like shards of frozen air. Every representative felt the tension. They were preparing to make a decision that would affect an entire world dot in the center of the hall. The human envoy stood alone on the round platform. The envoy's boots echoed softly each time the person shifted weight. Humans were still relatively new to the assembly compared to the ancient species around them, but in only a few decades, they had changed trade routes, built alliances, and made their presence impossible to ignore. Some admired them. Many feared them. A few hated them. A voice rose from the high seat at the front, calm but strict. It belonged to the presiding ruler, a tall being with a long forehead ridge that curled like a crown. The ruler's tone carried no warmth. It was the tone of someone making a final announcement, not opening a discussion. The assembly has reviewed the actions of the species known as humans, the voice declared. Their expansion has been unpredictable. Their methods are disruptive. Their inventions, often shared without caution, disturb the balance of our regions. And their ambitions spread faster than the agreements we have established. Across the hall, several alien delegates nodded. Some tapped their claws or tentacles in support. Others kept silent, but watched closely, waiting for the moment when the humans would finally be put in their place. The envoy remained silent. The list of complaints continued. Human exploration had reached zones that had been untouched for thousands of years. Human traders often broke old traditions simply because they did not understand them. Human diplomats talked too fast, moved too quickly, and made decisions even faster. In the eyes of the assembly, humans behaved like a wildfire in a forest that had stayed still for far too long. The presiding ruler spoke again. This council will now confirm the vote on the motion to exile Earth from the central regions and push humanity to the far edge of the galaxy, not to return until this assembly approves. The hall hummed with anticipation. Representatives raised their glowing vote symbols one by one. Blue for acceptance, green for rejection, red for abstention. One by one, they lit up the hall. The pattern grew clearer with every passing second. The majority was choosing blue. Humans would be exiled. Some species watched with satisfaction. Others seemed nervous, aware that this decision might set a dangerous example. A few beings looked down, uncomfortable with the idea of exiling an entire world, but unwilling to stand against the majority. When the vote was over, the result appeared in the air as a floating grid of light. The blue squares outnumbered the rest by a wide margin. The decision was final. A quiet wave passed through the hall. Some sighed with relief. Others whispered in excitement. A few looked toward the human envoy, expecting an outburst, a plea, or maybe anger. Humans were emotional, after all. Humans argued. Humans fought for what they wanted. Surely the envoy would react, but the envoy stood still. The person's breath did not waver. The posture did not change. It was as if the decision had not landed at all. This unsettled many representatives more than any angry protest would have. Silence from a human was far more unpredictable than a loud reaction. The presiding ruler continued. Earth is ordered to prepare for relocation. A period of 6 galactic cycles is granted for withdrawal from the central routes. After that, all presence of human vessels within regulated space will be considered a violation. The envoy raised their eyes slowly, meeting the gaze of the ruler. Many expected a desperate argument, but all the envoy said was, "Understood." The single word echoed in the hall. No emotion, no debate, no request for reconsideration. Just acceptance. The presiding ruler blinked, a sign of confusion. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. This was not how humans usually behaved. They were known for pushing back, negotiating, bargaining, anything but quiet agreement. But the envoy gave a brief bow, turned around, and walked off the platform. The boots echoed again, soft but steady. The envoy's steps carried a strange confidence, not the defeated shuffle most expected. Some representatives looked at each other with worry. Others whispered to their neighbors, "Why didn't they fight it? Are they planning something?" Maybe they finally learned their place. But no one truly believed the last one. Even those who disliked humans knew that humans rarely accepted limits quietly. By the time the envoy reached the exit, the presiding ruler spoke once more, trying to keep authority in their voice. "Ensure Earth understands the consequences of resistance." The envoy paused only for a moment. "Humanity understands everything," the envoy replied calmly. Then the doors opened, and the person stepped out without looking back. Outside the hall, the atmosphere felt different. The corridors were busy with assistants, guards, and observers, but they all moved aside when they saw the envoy. Everyone had heard the news already. Information traveled fast within the assembly. Some beings stared openly. Others avoided eye contact. The envoy walked past them with steady steps, pulling out a small communicator and sending a coded message to Earth. No words were spoken aloud, but the meaning was clear. The message reached human leadership within moments. The assembly has voted. Prepare the next phase. Back on Earth, the message arrived inside a secured chamber deep under the planet's surface. Human leaders sat around a long table. They were not politicians in fancy robes. They were scientists, engineers, explorers, strategists, people who had shaped Earth's growth over the last decades. When the message appeared on the screen, no one looked shocked. They had expected this outcome for a long time. But they also knew that this was not the end. It was the beginning. One of the senior leaders spoke first. So they finally made their decision. Another nodded. They want us gone. They think moving us will solve their fears. A scientist leaned forward. They have no idea how fast we can adapt. The room filled with a quiet understanding. Humanity had many faults, but one strength stood above all. They did not break under pressure. They acted. They built. They changed their path without waiting for permission. The leaders exchanged looks, and a decision formed without the need for long debate. "We won't wait for them to send us away," one of them said. "If they voted to exile us, then we will leave on our own terms." And ahead of schedule, another added dot around them. Screens lit up with diagrams of starships under construction, new propulsion systems, unfinished colonies at the edge of known space, and technology that had been kept secret until the right moment. The plan had existed for years, quietly expanding in the background. Humanity had always suspected that the assembly would eventually feel threatened enough to push them out. Humans had grown faster than most species predicted, and the old powers did not like surprises. A lead engineer tapped the table. "We accelerate everything. No delays. No hesitation." A commander agreed. "We prepare the fleet. If the galaxy wants us gone, we'll go. But not as castaways." A quiet excitement filled the room. They were not afraid. They were energized. Exile meant nothing if one carried determination. Humans had crossed oceans with simple boats, deserts with nothing but hope, and space with ships patched together from metal and dreams. This was just another frontier dot as the leaders finalized their plans. The human envoy walked toward their ship at the assembly station. The envoy felt dozens of alien eyes watching from a distance, trying to read human emotions. But the envoy kept the same calm expression as before. When the ship doors closed behind the envoy, the engines ignited, and the craft began its journey back to Earth. The envoy looked once through the window at the shining structure of the assembly, They think we lost, the envoy whispered quietly. But they have no idea what they've just started. The ship turned away from the elegant rings of the station and accelerated into the dark, star-filled distance. The message had already been sent, and Earth was already preparing. Humanity did not wait to be told twice. They were already moving. The human envoy ship returned to Earth with a quiet glide, entering the atmosphere like a falling star and leaving a trail of faint light behind it. Many people on the surface looked up when they saw it. Some pointed, some whispered, some felt a heavy worry settle in their stomachs because they already knew something huge had happened. Ships from the Galactic Assembly didn't come home with that kind of glow unless the news was serious. Inside an underground command facility, humanity's top leaders stood around a long table shaped like a half circle. Screens showed maps of the galaxy, fuel reserves, shipyards, and distant colonies. People were tired, tense, and silent, waiting for the envoy to arrive. The doors finally opened, and the envoy walked in, still carrying the same steady expression as in the assembly hall. Everyone looked at them, hoping the situation was not as bad as they feared, though all of them already knew the answer in their hearts. The envoy spoke clearly, without trying to soften anything. The assembly voted. It's official. Earth is exiled. A heavy quiet fell over the room. Everyone expected anger, panic, maybe even shouting. But instead, a deep calm spread through the space. Some lowered their heads, thinking. Others stared at the glowing screens, imagining what would happen next. Finally, one of the senior leaders exhaled. So they really went through with it. They think pushing us away will reduce their problems. Another leader shook their head gently. It's not about problems. It's about fear. They are afraid of what we might become. A scientist standing near the edge of the room pressed a sensor pad, bringing up a hologram of the assembly's vote count. Blue squares filled the air like a cold storm. They didn't even hesitate, the scientist said. This decision was already made long before today. But instead of despair, something else appeared in their eyes, a spark. The same spark humans had carried for thousands of years whenever life cornered them. A stubbornness. A fire. The envoy stepped closer to the table. They granted us 6 galactic cycles to leave the central regions. A few eyebrows lifted. 6 cycles sounded like a lot, maybe years of work, but we're not going to use 6, the envoy continued. We leave before they expect it. We move first. The room came alive instantly. People leaned forward. Screens brightened. Plans, long hidden, began to reveal themselves. Earth had been preparing for this moment quietly, almost secretly, for many years. They had seen it coming. Humans had entered the galactic stage too fast, advanced too quickly, discovered too much in too little time. While other species moved carefully, slowly, guarding their knowledge, humans explored with open hands and open minds. To some planets, humanity was a source of hope. To others, a threat. Human leaders had predicted that one day, the old powers would try to push Earth aside. That was why the Second Dawn Initiative was created long ago. Many people knew only the surface-level version, a project to expand human colonies. But the true purpose was much deeper. It was a plan to ensure humanity would survive anything the galaxy threw at them. One of the engineers tapped her screen, showing massive shipyard structures orbiting Earth. We already completed 70% of the Exodus fleet, she said, hidden behind scattering shields, just as planned. Another expert added, the new drives are almost ready for testing. They'll take us farther than any assembly-approved ship can travel. A commander pointed at a map of dark outer regions far from the central routes. If they want us to live on the edge of the galaxy, we'll turn that edge into our own territory. The envoy walked to the screen displaying the shipyards. They think Exile will weaken us, the envoy said quietly. But exile will free us. Everyone understood. Without assembly restrictions, humans would build faster, explore freely, create without needing approval from ancient councils stuck in old traditions. A strategist leaned forward. We must prepare the people, not with fear, but with direction. If the world hears we are exiled, they will panic. But if they hear we are choosing our own future, they will unite. The discussion continued, moving smoothly from logistics to inspiration. Plans formed layer by layer. Fuel, supplies, construction schedules, communication codes, evacuation sequences. Every detail mattered, but while the leaders worked on strategy, the real heartbeat of the response was happening outside the facility. Across the world. In cities, families gathered around screens showing rumors about the vote. News channels talked about unconfirmed reports of a major political blow. People on the streets asked each other what it meant. Was Earth being punished? Was war coming? Would humans be forced to leave their home planet? At schools, teachers paused lessons when emergency alerts appeared in the air. Students stared, worried about their future. Some wondered if they would grow up on another planet far from Earth-dotted factories. Workers slowed down and exchanged tense whispers. Everyone wanted clarity, and humanity's leadership knew that clarity had to come quickly. Public communication satellites activated globally. Every device, every holoscreen, every platform displayed the same symbol, Earth's crest. Then a voice broadcast across the world, calm, measured, strong. The Galactic Assembly has voted to exile humanity. They believe we are too bold, too quick, too unpredictable. They think removing us will protect their ancient balances. Millions of hearts tightened. The voice continued, but hear this clearly. We are not victims. We are not defeated. And we are not waiting to be pushed. We move ahead by our own decision. People everywhere held their breath. For years, we have built toward this moment. We have prepared for independence. We have prepared for a future where we decide our own path among the stars. Today, that future begins. The message ended. Silence followed. A heavy silence that slowly began to shift. In some places, applause broke out. In others, people cried not in fear, but in pride. Humanity had always been stubborn, but they had also always been brave. The idea of leaving the central regions sounded terrifying at first, but knowing that Earth was choosing to act, choosing to be strong, gave people something to hold on to. In shipyards orbiting the moon, thousands of workers cheered when they saw the message projected across the sky panels. They increased their pace. Welders sparked brighter. Repair drones moved faster. Engineers leaned over railings, shouting instructions with renewed energy. In distant human colonies, miners stopped their drills and wiped their faces as the message reached them. Many of them had left Earth long ago. To them, exile was not fear, it was expansion. A chance for new beginnings. Not everyone was excited. Some were scared. Some questioned whether humanity could survive without the Assembly's trade networks or protections. But even those with doubts felt a strange respect for the boldness of the decision. Back in the command facility, the envoy and the leaders watched the global reactions. The excitement, the fear, the unity. It was all part of the human spirit they counted on. One leader finally spoke. So it begins. No turning back. The envoy nodded. Then we rally everyone. Engineers, pilots, scientists, builders. And ordinary families too. We will not simply leave. We will rise. The work expanded immediately. Resource lists were checked again and again. Young cadets lined up outside training centers to volunteer for the exodus. Old space captains dusted off their uniforms and returned to service. Researchers slept at their desks. building better engines. Farmers prepared food vaults to feed the first waves of travelers. Humanity transformed in a matter of hours, not into a desperate people fleeing punishment, but into a determined civilization preparing for a new chapter. Days passed, and Earth grew brighter with activity. More ships lit up space every night, rising like fireflies, leaving a glowing forest. Every person understood one truth now. If the galaxy pushed humans away, humans would turn the frontier into their home. If the assembly wanted them on the edge, then the edge would become a new center Earth's center. Inside the command facility, the final checklists were being prepared. Leaders looked tired but satisfied. They had expected humanity to fear exile, but instead, humanity embraced it like a challenge. The envoys stepped to a quiet corner, looking out a large window showing Earth's blue glow. There was a softness in their expression, not sadness but reflection. They thought we would beg, the envoy murmured. They thought we would cling to their approval. A small smile appeared, but we are humans. We don't move because someone tells us. We move because we choose to. And somewhere deep inside that facility, engines roared to life, engines meant for the greatest journey humanity had ever taken. In the weeks after Earth received the exile order, the skies above the planet changed in a way the rest of the galaxy could never imagine. At night, the darkness was filled with moving lights, fleets of construction drones, cargo shuttles, and long bridges of glowing panels that stretched between unfinished ships. The air itself seemed to hum with the sound of creation. Humanity had switched into a mode that only humans understood, the mode where fear turned into action, and action turned into progress. Far above the planet, hidden behind layers of scattering shields that bent light and confused scanners, a massive ring-shaped complex floated in silent orbit. It was not visible from the ground, unless one knew exactly where to look. This place was the heart of the Exodus Fleet project, and it had grown far larger than even many humans realized. Long metal arms stretched outward like a great mechanical flower, each holding half-built hulls, engines, and solar sails. Inside the ring, thousands of people worked side by side. Engineers in pressure suits clung to the outer frames, attaching plates that shimmered with a soft blue shine. Operators rode along mag rails, carrying engines the size of buildings to their proper slots. Technicians moved through narrow corridors, testing circuits that pulsed like veins. Everywhere. Voices filled the air. Stabilize that joint. Keep the field generator cool. Shift the cargo line back 5 meters. Even though the work was exhausting, nobody complained. Everyone knew the stakes. Earth was not building a few ships. They were building a future. Near the center of the shipyard, a giant workshop hummed with heavy machines. 7 enormous frames stood lined up, each shaped like the skeleton of a starship. These were the first colony Ark's massive vessels, designed to carry thousands of people, supplies, and even fragments of Earth's environment. Inside each one would be gardens, water tanks, small forests, and enough food to survive years of travel. A group of engineers surrounded the first Ark, studying its drive core. The core glowed faintly like a newborn star. One of them wiped sweat from their forehead, saying, "We never had permission to build something like this under assembly rules." Another laughed softly. "Good thing we stopped waiting for permission a long time ago." The truth was simple. Humans had been preparing for independence long before the exile vote. Plans for advanced engines, stronger shields, and long-range habitats had been quietly developed in secret labs. The assembly restricted allot speed, weapon strength, resource extraction limits. But humans had always designed around those rules, creating technology that could evolve the moment restrictions were lifted. Now that the exile order had come, they no longer had to hide. A young technician leaned over the glowing core, amazed. "Imagine it. This engine could take us all the way to the outer fringe." A senior engineer placed a hand on the metal rail. "Not just take us. Help us settle there. Build there. Grow there." He paused, then added, "The assembly thinks they're sending us to a dead end, but we're turning that dead end into a beginning." Meanwhile, in another part of the ring, workers guided a new type of hull plate into position. These plates were made of a flexible metallic material that responded to temperature and pressure. It could repair small cracks on its own and adjust shape to handle different atmospheres. The material came from a human research program once shut down by the assembly for being too unpredictable. Yet here it was, forming the skin of humanity's greatest ships. Floating cranes lifted segments with slow, graceful movements. Voices echoed through calm channels. The workers on the outside of the ships often paused to admire their progress. Some had spent their entire careers dreaming of building vessels like these, ships that could cross the galaxy without fear. Down in the main cargo hangar, the atmosphere was just as intense. Rows of containers stretched farther than the eye could see food. Medicine, tools, seeds, construction machines, and strange metallic crates marked with coded symbols. Rovers from Earth's deserts, ice drills from its poles, and laboratory kits for new worlds were loaded one after another. People on the ground worked just as hard. Every nation, every city, every small town contributed something. Farms donated crops and preserved seeds. Colleges sent research papers and training guides. Artists recorded music and stories to keep humanity's culture alive in the frontier. It was not just technology being backed, it was identity. Inside one of the finished arcs, a group of volunteers walked through the wide halls. The floors were smooth and bright, the walls lined with soft lights that glowed like warm daylight. They reached a large chamber filled with greenery trees, tall plants, and a flowing stream running through the middle. The air smelled fresh, and the faint sound of water made the place feel like a peaceful forest hiding inside metal walls. A little girl walked beside her parents, looking around with wide eyes. "This is going to be our new home?" she asked softly. Her father nodded gently. "Part of it, yes. Until we reach the new world." She touched one of the leaves. "It feels like Earth." "That's the idea," her mother said with a smile. "We're carrying a bit of Earth with us wherever we go." These arcs were more than ships. They were symbols of human will, reminders that even when pushed out, humans carried their world with them. In another section of the shipyard, a meeting took place in a quiet control center. Large windows looked out over the glowing construction fields. A group of supervisors gathered around a table covered in diagrams. One of them pointed at a hologram. "We need to test the dark mass sails next. If they deploy correctly, the outer colonies will have power even in star-poor regions." Another shook his head. "We're ahead of schedule, but behind on fuel storage. Push more workers onto the refinery line." A communications officer looked up from her console. Scanners picked up assembly probes near the outer perimeter. "They're trying to figure out what we're doing." Everyone paused. The supervisor smiled faintly. "Let them try. They won't see anything through the shields." It was true. The scattering fields humans developed were so advanced that even high-level assembly sensors read nothing but empty space. To the rest of the galaxy, Earth looked calm and quiet. To humans, it was the most intense moment in their history. But the question everyone whispered at night was simple. Would the assembly interfere if they realized the scale of Earth's preparations? Most believed they would. But humanity didn't plan to give them time. The envoy from the assembly returned to the shipyard. After a long briefing on Earth, the envoy walked along a transparent corridor that hung over the construction area. Below, workers moved like tiny lights across the halls. The envoy stopped to watch. The sheer size of the project made the envoy take a slow breath. This was more than defiance. It was a transformation, A voice behind the envoy spoke softly. It was the fleet commander, a tall figure in a dark uniform. We're ahead of schedule. By the time the assembly checks on us again, we'll be ready to leave. The envoy nodded. Good. The galaxy expects us to panic. Let them think that. The commander leaned against the railing, looking down at the ships. We're not just leaving. We're upgrading ourselves. The envoy smiled a little. Exactly. Work continued day and night. More ships rose from the shipyard, a mix of colony arcs, escort craft, heavy transports, and science vessels. Some were sleek, with long wings meant for solar harvesting. Others were thick and armored, ready to carve paths through debris fields. Every ship was designed for long-term independence. As days passed, the fleet took shape. Humans watched from Earth's surface, standing in parks and rooftops. Children pointed at the glowing trails, excited. Elders stared with quiet pride, remembering the time when humanity first went to the moon. Now humanity was preparing to leave the central galaxy entirely. One evening, a group of workers sat on a maintenance platform outside a nearly completed arc. They watched Earth slowly rotate beneath them, a blue and green sphere full of life. One of them whispered, "Hard to believe we're leaving this behind." Another worker leaned back, resting. "We're not leaving. We're expanding. Earth will still be our home. But now we're building new homes too." A third worker added, "They tried to push us away. Instead, they pushed us to grow." The stars around them flickered, silent witnesses to humanity's preparations. By the end of the third month, the first of the Exodus fleet ships powered up their cores. Blue and gold light shimmered across their hulls. Internal systems ran checks. Engines hummed with controlled power. Earth's leaders gathered in the command facility, watching the live feed. The envoy stood among them, expression calm but proud. The first ark floated away from the shipyard slowly, like a giant whale drifting through a deep ocean. A wave of cheers erupted across the facility. On Earth, people burst into celebration as the image broadcast. Globally, humanity was ready. The galaxy had voted to exile. Them, humanity answered by building the greatest fleet they had ever imagined. The fleet that would take them farther than anyone expected. And the fleet that proved one truth. When humans are pushed, they don't fall. They build. They rise. They move forward. The moment the envoy's execution footage spread across the planet, something shifted deep inside people. At first, it was shock, then disbelief, then a heavy wave of fear that spread from city to city like a cold wind. But slowly, that fear turned into something sharper and stronger. It turned into anger. Not the wild kind, but the steady kind that rises from people who feel they have been pushed too far. People who realize they must stand together or lose everything. Inside the Earth Defense Command bunker, the air felt tense, but not hopeless. The human envoy who had escaped the Galactic Council station sat at the round table with the leadership officers. He still had the marks on his suit from his narrow escape, and his breathing was steady but heavy, as if replaying everything over and over in his mind. For a long moment, no one spoke. They only stared at the large holographic screen showing the Council's declaration. Humans were officially labeled as a dangerous, unstable species. The message announced that all peaceful negotiations had been canceled. The envoy's execution was called a preventive measure, and the Council claimed more action was coming. The escapee finally broke the silence and spoke in a calm voice. They didn't even want to talk. It was all decided before we got there. Everyone listened carefully. They could feel the weight in his words. He had witnessed everything up close. He had seen the cold expressions of the council members, the complete lack of guilt, the almost casual way they had ordered the deaths of peaceful human representatives. An officer leaned forward. his tone controlled but intense. Did they show any sign of hesitation? Anything at all? The envoy shook his head. Nothing. It was like they were moving insects. That single sentence made the room grow colder. A communications officer pulled up intercepted signals. There's movement in the outer sectors. Several Council-aligned fleets are adjusting their courses. We believe they're preparing for something larger. The room fell into a deeper silence. Finally, Earth's commander spoke. He was older, his voice steady, the kind that calmed people even in the worst storms. Then we have no choice. We must move forward with the Annihilation Protocol. The envoy looked up, the light from the hologram reflecting in his tired eyes. Once we activate it, there is no going back. The commander replied with a firm tone. They crossed the line, and they did it without hesitation. If we do nothing, we disappear. If we hesitate, we invite extinction. Everyone in the bunker knew the protocol had never been meant to be used. It was created only as a last defense, a shield made from desperation. A warning held in reserve for the day humanity faced something far beyond negotiation. That day had finally arrived. The protocol's first step wasn't destruction, it was preparation. Every major station around Earth came alive, lights glowing across massive structures like awakening giants. Underground bunkers hummed as dormant systems powered up. The outer defense rings adjusted their positions with slow, controlled movements. Automated units rolled out of their sealed vaults. Orbiting satellites realigned and formed a protective network around the planet. Each one linked to the others in a connected grid. Normal people didn't know the full details of the protocol, but they understood enough to become part of it without question. Engineers volunteered to work double shifts. Students offered to help with simulations. Retired pilots returned to service. Families gathered supplies and moved to safer zones without panicking. They weren't acting out of fear. They were acting out of unity. The thought of losing their home triggered something powerful inside them. While the planet prepared, the envoy who had escaped from the Council joined the team analyzing the alien footage. The execution images looped again and again in the background, but he tried not to look at them. Instead, he focused on understanding the Council's weapons, their formation patterns, their timings, anything that could help Earth predict what would happen next. One analyst pointed at one of the frames. This ship design is new. They didn't have this model last cycle. The envoy studied it, his eyes narrowing. That means they were preparing long before meeting us. They didn't build these ships in a few days. The realization settled in everyone's mind. The execution was not a mistake or sudden decision. It was part of something larger. Meanwhile, outside the bunker, the world changed in ways no one had experienced before. Skies filled with faint blue lines as protective grids activated. Distant hums echoed through quiet towns as shield towers came online. Children pointed at the glowing patterns in the sky, unaware of the danger behind them. Adults watched with determination, not panic. Earth was turning into a fortress, not because it wanted war, but because war had been forced upon it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the same scene unfolded across every continent. Crowds gathering near public screens. People stood shoulder to shoulder as the global announcement played. The commander appeared, his expression calm but firm. He spoke gently but clearly, as if addressing every single person individually. Today, we faced an action meant to break our spirit. But instead of fear, we choose unity. Instead of surrender, we choose survival. We did not start this conflict. We sought peace. But peace was denied. Now we protect our home. His message spread around the world within seconds, followed by millions of responses, messages of support, determination, and resilience. No threats, no hate, only resolve. Back in the bunker, the envoy stepped outside for a moment. The night air was cold but grounding. He looked up at the sky and saw the defense grid shining faintly like a web of stars. It reminded him of the Council station, but this time the light brought comfort instead of dread. He thought of the fallen envoys. He thought of what they had hoped for. They had believed in peaceful solutions. They had believed in understanding. They had believed that the galaxy could be shared. Their dreams felt distant now, but not lost. As he stood there, a young technician passed by, holding a diagnostic tablet. She recognized him and paused. "Sir, I just want to say, thank you for coming back. If you hadn't escaped, we wouldn't know what the Council had done." He didn't know what to say at first. He simply nodded. "I didn't escape for myself. I escaped because someone had to tell the truth." She nodded and walked on, leaving him alone again with the sky. Inside, the command screens lit up with new alerts. Alien scout probes had been detected near the outer system. They were small, fast, and difficult to track, but they were unmistakably Council-made. The commander issued the order. "Do not engage. Let them watch. Let them see we are not afraid." The probes circled quietly, gathering data, transmitting back to their masters. But what they saw was not a weak world. They saw a planet unified like never before. As night turned to early morning, Earth continued its preparations. Large transport units moved across highways, carrying supplies to fortified zones. Research labs tested new shielding frequencies. Old prototypes were pulled from storage and upgraded. Everything that humanity had ever created for defense, no matter how experimental, no matter how incomplete, was now needed. The envoy eventually returned to the main table. A new report awaited. The scans showed that the Council's fleets had increased their formations. More ships were gathering. More weapon signatures appeared. The next phase of the conflict was coming. But unlike before, the humans no longer felt alone. For the first time, they understood their own strength, not the strength of weapons, but the strength of unity, of shared purpose, of standing together not out of fear, but out of love for their home. The commander placed his hands on the table and spoke quietly, almost like a whisper meant for the planet itself. "They wanted to make an example of us. Instead, they awakened something far stronger." The envoy nodded slowly. "They don't understand humans. They never did. They think fear breaks us." The commander answered, "But fear only makes us stronger." The bunker lights dimmed slightly as systems entered synchronized standby mode, ready for the next step of the protocol. Above the planet, the defense grid pulsed like a heartbeat. Humanity had made its choice, and the galaxy was about to witness it. The first ships of the Exodus fleet glided silently away from Earth, cutting through the blue atmosphere like glowing comets. People gathered in cities, towns, and villages to watch the great vessels rise, leaving trails of shimmering light behind them. Some held their children, pointing excitedly, while others simply stood in silence, their hearts heavy with pride and hope. It was the first time humanity had ever moved as one, leaving behind the home that had nurtured them for millennia to face the unknown. Inside the command vessels, the humans moved with a sense of purpose that surprised even the oldest veterans. Every officer, engineer, and crew member understood that this was no ordinary mission. They were explorers, pioneers, and guardians of their species' future. The journey would be long, dangerous, and uncertain, but it was a choice. And for humans, choice had always been more valuable than comfort. The envoy who had returned from the Council watched from the bridge of the lead ship. Lights reflected off the polished control panels, and the hum of the engines filled the room. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, distant and cold, but full of possibilities. The envoy's eyes swept across the fleet, each ship carrying thousands of people, supplies, and the hope of a species determined to survive. Do they understand what they've done? Asked one of the younger officers. The council, I mean. The envoy's expression was calm but firm. They think exile will weaken us. They don't realize that being forced to move can make a species stronger, sharper, faster. Humanity does not wait. Humanity acts. In the outer reaches of the solar system, humans began the delicate work of establishing new footholds. The first colonies were not simple settlements. They were small cities in orbit around distant planets, equipped with sustainable energy, hydroponic gardens, and laboratories designed to study the surrounding space. Engineers worked tirelessly, adapting old technologies to new worlds. Every success felt like a small victory against the forces that had tried to control them. On one of the outer colonies, a young technician stared out of a viewport at a barren planet. The surface was harsh and unforgiving, a reddish desert that stretched farther than the eye could see. Yet she felt a thrill, unlike anything she had ever experienced. "This is where we begin," she whispered. "This is where we show them what humans can do." Nearby, a group of pilots tested new propulsion systems on small transport ships. They performed daring maneuvers around the planet's atmosphere, demonstrating both skill and courage. Each test carried risks, but humanity had never shied away from risk. It had been the fuel of every discovery, every voyage, every triumph. Now it was the fuel of survival. Back on Earth, the population watched the broadcasts from the colonies. People could see the tiny cities taking shape on distant worlds, the engines igniting in the darkness, and the lights of the fleet moving steadily outward. A sense of unity spread across the planet. For once, differences in culture, politics, and language felt secondary. Humanity was moving together, a single organism with a single-purpose dot, as the fleet expanded further into unclaimed space. Humans encountered new challenges. Meteoroid fields, radiation belts, and unstable orbits tested every ship's systems. Engineers worked around the clock, adapting shields, modifying engines, and reinforcing hulls. Each challenge was met not with fear, but with determination. Every problem solved was a lesson learned, a step closer to independence. The envoy continued to monitor communications between the ships. Messages flowed constantly. Updates on supplies, reports on new findings, questions about uncharted systems, and suggestions for improvements. Humanity's ability to adapt quickly amazed even the most experienced officers. In every corner of the fleet, people were thinking, planning, and creating solutions to problems that had no precedent. The spirit of innovation was alive in every human, from the youngest recruit to the oldest engineer. On one ship, a group of scientists experimented with terraforming equipment. Their goal was not to conquer a planet, but to make it habitable for future generations. They adjusted atmospheric processors, tested soil for nutrients, and studied local weather patterns. Each successful test brought hope. Each failure brought knowledge. And in every case, they celebrated progress, no matter how small. Meanwhile, the outer colonies began to attract attention from nearby alien civilizations. Some observed quietly, curious about the human sudden expansion. Others approached cautiously, offering trade, advice, or technology. Humans were cautious too, aware that not every interaction would be friendly. But their approach was clear. Respect and fairness would guide every decision. If any species wanted to cooperate, humans were ready. If they tried to threaten or deceive, humans were prepared. A meeting took place aboard one of the larger colony ships. Leaders from different colonies gathered around a glowing table, discussing expansion, security, and resource allocation. Maps of nearby star systems rotated above the table, showing planets, asteroids, and strategic points. Everyone listened carefully, shared ideas, and made plans. The tone was cooperative, focused, and forward-looking. There was no time for petty arguments, no room for hesitation. Every decision mattered. "Fuel reserves are running low in the outer rim," said one logistics officer. "We need to establish a supply line." A scientist responded, "We can set up refineries on that asteroid cluster near the orbit of the red star. It has enough materials to last decades." A pilot added, "If we set up automated transports, we can keep the colonies connected without risking personnel." The envoy listened quietly, nodding in approval. "Good. Make it happen. The galaxy expects humans to stumble. Let's show them how far determination can go." At night, when the work slowed and crews rested, people looked out at the stars. They thought of Earth, of the Council, and of the endless possibilities ahead. Children played in the corridors, laughing, unaware of the dangers outside. Adults spoke softly of the lives they were building, the challenges they would overcome, and the history they were creating. Every day was a lesson in resilience, cooperation, and courage. Over time, humans began to transform barren worlds into thriving habitats. Small forests grew under protective domes. Hydroponic farms produced more food than expected. Research laboratories discovered new minerals, energy sources, and technologies that could change the future. Colonies became self-sufficient faster than anyone had anticipated, a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity. Word of humanity's progress spread beyond their own species. Neighboring civilizations began to view humans differently. Some were impressed. Some were wary. But all recognized one truth: humans were no longer a species to be underestimated. They had survived exile, adapted to the unknown, and turned challenges into opportunities. Back in the Fleet Command Center, the envoy reflected on everything that had happened. "We are proving ourselves," the envoy said quietly. "Every step, every choice, every effort, it all matters. They may have tried to push us away, but look at what we are becoming." The commander nodded. "They thought exile would make us weaker. Instead, it has made us stronger. They have given us space to grow. We are shaping the future on our own terms." In time, humanity's colonies became interconnected. Trade routes formed between planets. Communication networks linked ships, stations, and settlements. Culture, knowledge, and technology flowed freely. Humanity was no longer confined to Earth. They were everywhere, a new force in the galaxy, united and resilient. Every success reinforced the belief that humans did not need permission to thrive. Every obstacle overcome proved that determination, ingenuity, and courage could overcome fear. Every new world transformed into a thriving habitat was a reminder that exile had not defeated them. It had freed them. The envoy walked through one of the central hubs, watching engineers, pilots, scientists, and families working together. Children raced through corridors, laughter echoing off the walls. Adults exchanged ideas, repaired systems, and trained the next generation of explorers. The human spirit thrived, vibrant and unyielding dot, as the fleet and colonies expanded deeper into space. The Council could only watch. They had expected fear, surrender, and dependence. Instead, they saw humans rising, building, and thriving far from their control. Humanity had turned exile into opportunity, isolation into unity, and danger into strength. The envoy looked out at the stars once more. "They wanted to exile us," the envoy said softly. "Instead, we are becoming a civilization the galaxy cannot ignore." And humanity, united, determined, and unstoppable, moved forward into the unknown, ready to make the outer fringe of the galaxy their home and their legacy. The galaxy had not seen anything like it. Ships built to carry entire cities sailed silently through the void, their lights flickering like a swarm of fireflies in the darkness. From the distant observation posts of other civilizations, it looked almost peaceful. But inside each vessel, inside every colony station and command center, humans moved with quiet intensity. This was not a leisurely migration. This was survival, growth, and proof that no force could control them. Back on Earth, people watched as the Exodus fleet disappeared into the blackness. Families stood on rooftops, pointing to the trail of lights stretching far beyond the atmosphere. Children's eyes sparkled with wonder, while adults felt a mix of pride and sorrow. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was the origin of a civilization that had just taken the first bold steps toward becoming something greater. Inside the fleet, the envoy who had returned from the council paced along the command bridge. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, each one a reminder of both danger and opportunity. He stopped at the console, running simulations of potential obstacles ahead: asteroid fields, radiation belts, and uncharted gravitational anomalies. Everything was unpredictable, but humans had never thrived on certainty. Are the colonies ready for independent operations? He asked one of the officers. The officer's eyes were steady, filled with a quiet confidence. Yes, every settlement has been reinforced, every system tested. They are ready to manage themselves without Earth's direct oversight. The envoy nodded slowly. He had expected fear, doubt, or hesitation, but found none. Humans were not panicked or waiting for permission. They were already moving forward, learning, adapting, building. That was their strength. That was what the council had failed to understand. Meanwhile, the colonies themselves were buzzing with activity. On one of the newer settlements, children raced through the hydroponic farms, laughing as they touched strange, vibrant plants that had been adapted from Earth species. Adults worked on energy arrays, repaired machinery, and tested communication systems. Engineers floated along the corridors of orbital stations, adjusting panels and realigning sensors. Every task was a step toward independence. In one of the command centers, a meeting of leaders took place. Holographic maps rotated above the table, showing the locations of the fleet, nearby planets, and potential hazards. Officers discussed logistics, resource management, and long-term planning. No one argued for retreat or hesitation. The tone was calm, focused, and determined. "Fuel reserves are holding," said one logistics officer. "Even with increased consumption, we can maintain operations for the next cycle." A scientist added, "Terraforming experiments on the outer colonies are showing promising results. Atmospheres are stabilizing, water cycles are forming, and crops are growing faster than anticipated." A pilot leaned back in his chair. "And the fleet has maintained formation without incident. Navigation systems are performing beyond expectations." The envoy listened and nodded, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. "Good. Keep it steady. Every successful operation strengthens us, teaches us more about what we can achieve." While humans worked, the council began to notice something they had not anticipated. Reports came in from scouts and distant observers. Humans were not panicked. They were not retreating, and they were not pleading. Instead, they were thriving. New colonies formed, technologies advanced, and systems stabilized. Every time the council tried to monitor progress, they found that humans had already adapted, improved, and moved forward. The council had expected exile to weaken humanity, to slow them, to make them dependent on others. Instead, it was doing the opposite. Humans were becoming faster, smarter, and more capable. Their independence was growing, and with it, their influence. On one of the colony planets, engineers worked on expanding the first settlement. Habitats were extended, water purification systems doubled in capacity, and energy grids were reinforced. Scientists experimented with new methods of food production, combining Earth knowledge with local resources. Children learned in classrooms designed to prepare them for exploration, not just survival. Every day brought new challenges, but humans met each one with confidence. In the fleet, a young technician examined navigation charts. "We are approaching a dense asteroid belt," she said. "Our calculations suggest we can pass safely if we adjust the trajectory slightly." The envoy observed the data. "Good. Plot the course. We will not wait for the Council to interfere. We move now, and we move wisely." As the fleet entered the asteroid belt, ships maneuvered with precision. Engines flared and thrusters fired in careful bursts, guiding each vessel through the narrow gaps between massive rocks. The crew worked as a single organism, each action coordinated, each decision purposeful. Even when debris collided with shields or sensors detected anomalies, humans adapted instantly. They were not just surviving, they were learning, improving, and thriving. At night, when the work slowed, people took moments to reflect. On the observation decks, they gazed at the stars and thought of Earth. Some remembered their families still on the planet, waving goodbye as the fleet departed. Others remembered the envoy's words about the Council and its orders. And many thought simply of the future, imagining what their children and grandchildren might achieve in the worlds they were now building. Across the colonies, culture began to evolve. Humans carried music, literature, and art from Earth, but also began creating new forms inspired by the alien worlds around them. Scientists wrote papers on unique ecosystems, engineers documented new technologies, and artists captured the beauty of distant planets. Even as survival remained a priority, humanity never forgot what made them human: creativity, curiosity, and connection. In one of the largest colony ships, a group of adults trained the younger generation in navigation, piloting, and resource management. Children learned to operate small crafts, calculate trajectories, and manage energy systems. They also learned the values that had guided humanity for millennia: courage, cooperation, and the importance of protecting each other. The envoy watched a young girl float in zero gravity, adjusting a small satellite for practice. She laughed as she spun gently, her eyes full of excitement and determination. He smiled. "This is what we fight for," he whispered. "This is why we endure. This is why we survive." Meanwhile, communications officers in the fleet intercepted signals from distant systems. Some were curious messages from neighboring species, offering cautious cooperation. Others were warnings, reminding humans of the Council's power. The envoy and commanders read them all, but their response was simple: humans would act with integrity, defend themselves if necessary, and never wait for permission to thrive. As months passed, humanity's expansion continued. Colonies became self-sufficient, fleets strengthened, and connections between settlements improved. Resources were harvested responsibly, technologies were shared, and education became a central focus. Humans were no longer just surviving exile, they were building a future beyond it. The Council, watching from afar, could do nothing but observe. They had expected fear and surrender, but instead saw progress, unity, and resilience. The humans they had tried to exile were now a force the galaxy could not ignore. Every new world they settled, every innovation they developed, every fleet that launched into the void was proof of what the Council had underestimated: the spirit of humanity. The envoy, now a senior advisor, walked through the command hub one evening, observing the activities around him. Engineers adjusted shields, pilots monitored navigation, scientists analyzed data, and families prepared for the night cycle. Everyone worked together, each action purposeful, each contribution vital. Humans were alive with energy, determination, and creativity. He paused at the viewport, looking back at the small blue dot that had once been the center of their universe: Earth. It looked peaceful from space, quiet and strong, a reminder of everything they had fought to preserve. And yet, it was no longer the limit of their world. It was the beginning of an endless journey. "They wanted to exile us," the envoy said softly, speaking to no one in particular. "They thought we would break. They thought we would beg. But look at us now. We are beyond their expectations. We are beyond fear. Across the colonies and the fleet, humanity moved with purpose. They were explorers, builders, and pioneers. They were learners, teachers, and creators. They were more than a species. They were a civilization that refused to be controlled, refused to be diminished, and refused to be confined. And as the stars stretched infinitely around them, humans looked forward with hope, courage, and determination. They carried Earth in their hearts, knowledge in their minds, and the strength of countless generations in their hands. Nothing could stop them. Nothing could hold them back. They were humanity, and they had chosen their own destiny. The Council may have voted to exile Earth, but humans had already rewritten the rules. They were no longer waiting. They were already rising, already building, and already shaping the galaxy in their image. The future belonged to those who dared, and humanity had never been afraid to dare. In the end, exile did not break them. It made them stronger. It made them bolder. It made them unstoppable. And in the silence of space, under the light of distant stars, humans moved forward, together, toward a future of their own making, ready to